Here we are on BackPageLead, the first inaugural Vidcast. Wayne Carey, good morning.
Charlie.
We normally do this anonymously behind a microphone, only people can hear our voice.
We're looking into that now, are we?
I think we've got to.
So
Unless you want to look at my
no
dial.
more hand gestures to you.
two more beers, please.
Yeah.
Round 21, just been and gone. There was a few interesting talking points to come out of it. Perhaps first and foremost is Fremantle's controversial decision to rest 7 or 8 players. Now, it's happened a bit in the last couple of years. We saw Geelong do it one game, notably, and then they got beaten by Brisbane when they rested players. And then St Kilda did it down in Tasmania, but they managed to get over Hawthorn. Is there going to be an increasing trend that something like this happens?
Oh, look, I think each club has to gauge it on where they're at and whether players actually need a rest. I mean, if you don't need a rest, I don't think you'll see Collingwood doing it this week, or for that matter, probably St Kilda like they did last year. But I think genuinely, if players need a rest, then they'll rest them. It was trains, planes, automobiles. I know John Candy's not with us anymore, but that's what it took Fremantle to get to Tassie. It took them 2 days to get there. So long trip. Has it backfired because of their percentage? That's the big question. It's whether it backfires with their percentage and then they miss out on playing a home final. Then they lose all their advantage. Although you can say if they get all their players back and they win that first final here in Melbourne, then all of a sudden we'll be talking about Fremantle again. So look, you've got to eventually win in Melbourne, but. The only downside for them was probably the margin in the end, but I think I'm not critical of them for resting players. No, I think you've got to gauge that on individual needs, and obviously those players needed a rest. But
it is a new phenomenon. Dennis would, correct me if I'm wrong, Dennis Pagan I don't think would have rested players 15 years ago. Don't flirt with your form.
No, don't flirt with your form, but if you needed a rest, if he thought there were players in that side that genuinely needed a rest, he'd rest them. But like I said, you're not on the inner sanctum of Fremantle. How injured were they? Look, you're not going to see St Kilda rest any this week. You won't see Collingwood rest any. You won't see Mick Malthouse resting players this week. They'll be going out there to finish off well and go into the finals full steam ahead. So it depends on your list. Collingwood have got a full list to pick from. They've got no injuries. Fremantle have been decimated by injury. That's the difference.
So you're right, the percentage has been affected, but what about morale? I mean, how hard is it to back up after a 116-point loss in a game they need to win against Carlton this week?
Yeah, you probably don't look at the margin. I think a lot of obviously there's going to be 6 or 7 players in that team that won't be there next week. So, I don't think the morale will be, too down. I mean, they'll still be disappointed about some of the efforts, but the margin, I don't think they'll be worried too much about that, other than, like we said, the big issue here is a percentage and whether they miss out on a home final.
Yeah. Now, we were talking about a race in 5 a few weeks ago. It seemed to be one of the most open premiership races in recent memory. A couple appear to have dropped off the pace, one of them being Fremantle and the other being the Bullies, who've had a really worrying run into the finals. It seems like the spirit's gone and the sparkle's kind of gone from the place.
Yeah, look, you'd be worried if you're the Bulldogs. The last 2 weeks, some real worrying signs. I think they've probably dropped off the pace. All of a sudden, obviously Hawthorn playing an undermanned Fremantle, but Hawthorn still being that danger side outside the top 4. And another one's bobbed their head up who have been in great form, and that's the Sydney Swans. I mean, if Sydney, get their act together and they can
get a home final.
Home final, that hard-nosed approach that we know that they're capable of. Paul Roos, best coach in the AFL. I think he's too cool for school. I just think he's fantastic what he's done for the Sydney Swans. I think that he will. They're the other side outside that top 4 that could do a fair bit of damage. And all of a sudden, you've got Bulldogs in the top 4 struggling a little. They come up against. They get beaten in the first final, and then they come up against the second week against a Hawthorn or a Sydney. Boy, it'll be very interesting. Sydney may very well get into a preliminary final.
I want to rewind a minute. Let's revisit that statement you made. Paul Roos, best coach in the AFL. Better than Mick. Better than.
I don't think Paul Roos has ever put a foot wrong. I really don't. Since the time he took over at Sydney, I think his marketability, the way he speaks to the media, the way he handles himself, the way he coaches. I don't think, he's won a grand final at Sydney. They hadn't won one for 70 odd years. Did they have the best list? I don't think so. He got them to 2 grand finals. I think he's I don't know how many finals series. I think it's 6 or 7 or whatever it is. I think he's done tremendously well, and I just love his demeanour. I love his demeanour and the way he goes about things.
Was he coach when you went up to talk to Sydney? After when you were looking for your second club to play?
Yes, he was. Yeah.
Yeah. And what do you remember of that? Was he just a cool dude then?
Yeah. Look, I just think the way he handles himself, full stop, and like Nathan Buckley when he takes over from Mick Moldhouse. Collingwood have finished on the top this year. They've won the minor premiership. You'd expect them to finish in the top 4 again next year with the list they've got. There's only one way for Nathan Buckley to go. That's that way. And Paul Roos is up against it. Not Paul Roos. John Longmire's got a tough gig to follow. Paul Roos having done so well. I mean, then you take over a club that's had great success. Can be a tough act to follow, especially when you're talking in the likes of Mick Moldhouse and also Paul Roos.
Matthew Knights finds himself in a similar position.
That's right. Well, and the person to take over from Kevin Sheedy was always going to find it tough with the faithful. I mean, when you've coached a club for so long. I feel for Matty Knights a bit at the moment. He's certainly making it quite clear though that he's got the support of the board. I don't know whether there's a hidden message in all of that. He's putting it out there that he has the support. He's not worried. So that if it ever does happen, then maybe people frown upon this great club that follows things through, and backing of the coach. I think there's some nervousness in those comments. I think.
I feel sorry for him too. I think James Hird did him no favours whatsoever last week, lobbing a grenade over the walls of Windy Hill, and then watching the explosion and deciding a day later he didn't want to coach.
No, Charlie, like a lot of the media jumped on specific comments that he made, but right at the end of that he said he had no ambition to coach in the near future, and he was saying, the very minimal
day one or day
4 or 5 years, he said. And then he came out and clarified that again a day or so later, so I think people read too much into what he said, including his ex-teammate Matty Lloyd, who just jumped all over it. Body language. Matty's a body language expert now. I think that it was blown completely out of proportion, James Hird's comments, and he clarified that a day or two later.
Well, reading the story in the Herald Sun as I did, I mean, there were a couple of quotes there quite clear in their intent.
Were they cut up quotes or are they full
I haven't
version?
heard the full interview, so they might have been plucked out of context.
Well, yeah, I think if you read the very end of that article, he said he had no ambition to coach in the very near future.
So he would have gone from the Paran under-9s in the Moorabbin Junior Saints Football League to the senior coach's box. It's a big jump, isn't it?
It's a huge jump. Look, I think James Hird, I'm sure, would probably make a good coach, quite astute. But as he has said, he has no ambition to do it, and especially in the next 3 to 5 years anyway. So, for people that thought it was a bit undermined, I didn't look at it like that. I just think he was talking about a club that he obviously feels a lot about and got,
So you're jumping to Hirdy's defence. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Good. Well done. You've got to stay staunch, your former players.